Welcome to the Hope Natural Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Erin Ellis, your host. On this show, we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. Dr. Jessie Hehmeyer is the physician founder of Well Empowered, where she practices data-driven, outcome-oriented functional medicine. She created Well Empowered with one commitment in mind, guiding you to create the health and vitality that transforms your experience of life and alters what is possible for you. How does she live true to this? By taking a root cause natural medicine approach. Through working one-on-one with groups or in delivering corporate webinars, Dr. H provides the information, inspiration, and strategies needed to produce sustainable and transformative health outcomes. I'm excited for our conversation today. We're going to be talking about weight loss, cravings, general health, etc. So welcome to the show, Dr. Jessie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Erin. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and your community.
Yay! Well, first, before we dive into all the things, just tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got into what you currently do now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think like many of us who are natural medicine practitioners, our interest was probably birthed out of our own needs, right? And so that is for me also, growing up, there were different things that, we'd go to the pediatrician for, and there were things they handled great. And then over time, there were things that were not handled quite as well with a traditional approach. And so I started to get curious for myself at new ways that would be useful for healing my body, my digestion, finding a place where I felt like my metabolism was at its best, and simply put, I felt great in my body. And over the course of discovery, both of the science and heart of what I really think of as a sacred health journey that we're all on, I really was amazed by the body's capacity to heal, by my body's capacity to heal, pulling in these natural resources, these data-driven, scientifically based, but also heart-centered healing approaches. And from that, I ultimately made my way to graduate school, got a couple of graduate degrees, and, inside of my commitment that this work be available to people far and wide.
I love that. Yeah, same with me. I mean, you just said it spot on too. Like most of us get into this field because of something that happened to us or maybe a family member or something like that. So yeah, it's really helpful when you can relate to other people with your own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it's true for you too. It's like, there was a time in my life where like the things I was dealing with my digestion and with my weight and things like that, where I was, it was such a source of frustration. And, at one point I would have undone it. And now it's like, no, these are the jewels. These are the jewels that really make it possible for me to really get where people are and get, just like doggedly determined that we find solutions together.
Awesome. So one of your areas of expertise is addressing the root causes of cravings. What are the top 5 root causes of cravings, and how can women begin to tackle these naturally?
Yeah. So I'll list the 5 and then we'll kind of like go through them in a little greater detail. So the first one that I encounter is people riding what I like to call the blood sugar roller coaster. So first we'll talk about we'll circle back on the blood sugar roller coaster a moment. The second one is yeast overgrowth, also known as candidiasis, but yeast overgrowth. Number 3 is nutrient deficiencies or insufficiencies. 4 is insufficient sleep. And then 5 fundamentally is like a learned stress response. So if we go circle back to number one, that blood sugar roller coaster, to me, so much of this blood sugar roller coaster people will find ourselves on, which, looks like people consuming a higher sugar or higher carbohydrate food, which sends their blood sugar up really high. And as we know, our body does not like that. It relates to blood sugar a bit like it's a Goldilocks thing, right? It doesn't like it too high and it doesn't like it too low. And so when it's really, really high, our body's going to produce insulin to come save the day, except it's so enthusiastic about handling it is after our blood sugar goes up really high, it hits the ditch. And when it's down low, that's when we experience cravings born of this physiological low blood sugar as, kind of just rebound effect of it first being high and then going too low. So naturally speaking, those cravings are designed to bring our blood sugar back up. So there's real intelligence in those cravings, but we can get at it in a way that kind of reduces the level of ups and downs we have so that cravings are just naturally handled. So that's one thing I'd say about, blood sugar roller coaster and cravings. In the way of, I think it's helpful to kind of step back and in this world of cravings, look at what we inherited around food. And what I would say we inherited around food is kind of like an all or nothing approach. So all or nothing defined as overindulgence or deprivation. And, we'll dig into this more as we connect today, but this overindulgence deprivation is often played out in this blood sugar roller coaster that people find themselves on. And so I think it can be really useful to, continue to peel the onion and look at like, okay, yeah, but what's behind that? What's behind that? What's behind that? What's behind that? And so this, constant cycling between overindulgence and deprivation, which is really just kind of like the solution people have been handed through no fault of their own, is often something that promotes that physiology that leads to just more cravings. Number two I mentioned was that yeast overgrowth. And we know that when there are disruptions to the microbiome in our body and when there are more yeast present in our body, whether it's in our GI tract or throughout our bloodstream, so to speak, the thing that yeast love is sugar and simple carbs, right? So the sweets, the pasta, the bread, the pretzels, all those things that will promote more cravings, right? They're just going to put you on that blood sugar roller coaster we talked about. Those are the things that yeast said. So separate and independent of the blood sugar roller coaster, the yeast themselves actually hijack your brain and cause you, so to speak, to crave the foods that allow them to thrive. And I'm sure you've seen this, right? It's so fun working with someone who, when we identify like, oh yeah, yeast is at play in what you're dealing with, right? And we start to go after it. It's just kind of like a matter of time as the yeast population starts to decrease in the body, where people arrive at like, oh my gosh, my cravings are just gone, right? And at least part of it is given by those stinkers that have been hijacking your brain are no longer present or aren't present in the same quantities they were before. Number three, being nutrient deficiencies and insufficiencies, right? Sometimes when we do labs, right, most labs, standard lab tests anyway, will give us black and white information. It's normal or abnormal. But as you and I know, right, that's just not true, right? Different people, their unique physiology, their unique genes require different kinds of care. And these nutrients, when they're not optimized for the individual for a variety of reasons, whether it's actually like the production of satiety hormones or the reception of the message of those hormones or a whole host of other things, when our nutrients are not in optimal ranges, and these include everything from B12 to omega-3 fatty acids to even folate and vitamin D. These are just some examples. Magnesium, of things that when they're not in the sweet spot for people, they really can promote this perpetual, craving situation. I mentioned insufficient sleep. We know that when we sleep, a few different things happen related to cravings. First of all, our brain takes out the trash best when we sleep, right? From our neck down, we have the lymphatic system. From our neck up, we have the glymphatic system. And it's most active. It's most active at doing its job, removing cellular debris, helping your ultimately cleaning things up so that your neurotransmitters, which play a role in cravings, can work to the best of their ability. So that's just one of many ways insufficient sleep can impact cravings. And then we could also look at, like the hormonal impact and how insufficient sleep kind of exacerbates the blood sugar roller coaster also. And then number 5 we mentioned is just, a learned stress response, right? We live in a time of go, go, go and lots of stress, and, food and self-soothing through the pleasure one gets from food in times of stress has intelligence to it. And also, when people start to see a habit that's just not working for them, like, they see that their learned stress response is food or alcohol or something like that, and how they feel isn't great, and they don't love the way they feel in their bodies, they don't love the number on the scale, all these different things, well, then it might be time to kind of start to unwind and dig into how those stress responses were learned and what can we do to create new stress responses, new ways to self-soothe, because we all do need ways to self-soothe, but ways to self-soothe that are consistent with our devotion to our health and how we want to feel and show up for ourselves and others in the world.
Yeah, let's dive into a little bit more about that stress component, because I think that's a huge one, and it's not necessarily just related to cravings, but the cravings, obviously, if we're craving sugar, then that can increase inflammation, which can therefore increase weight. So it's also a learned, like you said, a learned habit. So let's dive in a little bit more about kind of like subconsciously how that works, and then also how women can manage the stress that supports, long-term vitality instead of what I call self-sabotage with the sweets and the treats.
Yeah. I mean, with the, learned stress response of, self-soothing with sugar, simple carbs, stuff like that, sweets and treats, as you said, there's so many different things we could look at with that, right? As you pointed to, Dr. Erin, right? When we're eating these foods, we're adding to our inflammatory load, and that inflammatory load is going to cause our body to slow down the metabolism and hold on to those calories, gripping onto those calories for dear life, gaining weight, all those things. With the level of stress that people are under, I think, the first thing that's most useful to begin to look at is, of the many stressors in life, are there any that I can reduce? Are there any I can reduce either through looking at this differently or actually just shifting what I expect of myself or others? Simple things like I was working with a woman who she'd had a habit of, checking her phone when she would wake up at 3 a.m. sort of thing. Like, is everybody in my life okay? Was kind of her thing. And, I get it. Like, it takes something to let go of such a habit, right? There's a real, goodness behind it, caring for your tribe, caring for your people, but also it's a little bit of like, okay, what would it look like to start practicing putting your own oxygen mask on first, right? When we're on planes, that's what they say. So how do we begin to take that concept and bring that to life for ourselves? And everybody's going to have their own unique answer to that, because all of us have different lives. All of us have different stressors, but starting to look at, okay, straws on a camel's back. What stressors can I reduce? And I would even point to the simple impact of, getting lab work done to see what's going on in your body. Nutrient deficiencies and insufficiencies are a type of stress. That's something that can be addressed fairly easily for most people. But then, of course, that by itself is not going to do it. We're going to need to keep looking down, going down and looking at, okay, emotional stressors, physiological stressors, immune stressors, inflammatory stressors. How can we get in there and support the body in different ways? But I do think it's helpful to remember that when we say the word stress, we often think only about psychological stress, and certainly that is a big component, but it's not the only one. There are things that can be addressed that are stressors to the body going on undercover that really meaningfully make a difference over time and do reduce the what I would think of as like the physiological stress load.
Yeah, and I think you said it too, like identifying, the straw on the camel's back. And that's what I preach all the time is awareness. Sometimes we're just not aware because it's like, it just becomes a habit. It's like, all right, at 2:00 I go and I get a Diet Coke, or, after I eat, I go and grab a cookie. It's like, but that's just a habit. You don't really need that. You've just trained your brain and your subconscious mind to go and do that. But is it really helping you? That's what I always say to women. It's like next time you go to the pantry for that sweet treat that that you don't need, just ask yourself, why are you doing this? What are you using this for? Is it replacing something? Maybe you need to drink more water. Maybe you need a hug. Maybe you need to go to bed. I don't know. Like ask yourself, why are you doing this, right?
Yeah, totally. And I love that, everything you just said, totally perfect. And about that going to bed, right? We know that when people are tired, there is a misinterpretation that happens in the brain. The misinterpretation being, I need energy in the form of food, when really they need energy in the form of sleep, right? And so breaking that, just like you said, creating that pause and going, wait, what do I really need right now? Actually, I need to get my butt in bed as quickly as possible, shut off all electronics and sleep. That is what I really need. So, it takes something to look at that. And I do, when I work with people, one of the things we start with in this work is what I call authoring your vision of vitality for your health in your life. Because I'm a big believer, as I know you are too, that we don't buy what we do, we buy why we do it. We buy why we do it. And so, the what might be one less glass of wine, or skipping the cookie after dinner. And that's the what. And for a variety of reasons, in any given moment, it may not be super compelling, right? To, not have the extra glass of wine or be a no to the cookie or whatever the thing is, right? But the whole conversation really shifts when people get clear from themselves what this is really for. What is this really for? And by that, it's really envisioning, pause for a moment. And I really do invite all of you listening to do this. Pause for a moment and time travel to the 5-year future and start to envision what it would be to be you thriving in this 5-year future. And, include in the word envision what it would feel like. Like what would your experience of yourself be like in 5 years with you thriving? Whether it's like your weight just handled, like it is what it is, it's a non-issue, it's not on your mind anymore like it was before, or your digestion working as you would like it to work, or your energy levels or your hormones balance, like all these different things. That 5-year future, what would that be like for you, and in your experience with yourself and experience with others? And so just even that simple reflection can be a useful compass in the moment, right? Remembering, okay, the why behind why why might I really be a no to wine it all tonight? There's actually maybe something in the future that wouldn't be available unless I master this.
Yeah, that's really good advice. So we talked about root cause of cravings, stress and cravings. Let's talk a little bit more about emotional eating and dieting and weight and, some steps that women can take to break this vicious cycle.
Well, one I would go back to is really getting clarity on your why, right? Because I know for myself, if I look back at the decade and a half I spent on the weight loss roller coaster, it wasn't for lack of caring, right? I really, I really did what I thought I should be doing to have this handled. And it just, for me, it wasn't working, right? But a few different things, puzzle pieces came into play at a time in my life that really shifted the trajectory for me. And fundamentally, I got that my struggles with this area of my life were interfering with my capacity to be fully present, fully connected, and to fully contribute the way I'm committed to contributing in this life. And when I saw the impact, I really just got like, my life's not going down like that. Like I'm not going to have my life be about me struggling with my weight. And I don't know, at that moment, I hadn't yet gotten, I hadn't studied this scientifically. I just knew there had to be a new way forward. And, in finding my way forward, I stepped into what I now call authoring my middle ground, right? I mentioned that broken and inherited all or nothing approach. I mean, that's what I was living in. It was this cycle of deprivation, overindulgence, because quite frankly, that was the playbook we have been handed. I had been handed, we've all been handed that playbook. And when I got how broken it was, I got committed to a new path, again, this middle ground mastery, and I got really clear on my why, right? As we were kind of talking about that vision of vitality, I got clear on my vision of vitality. Why is it so important to me to have this handled? And for me, it's really to realize my fullest potential and empower others to realize their fullest potential. And so grounding in your why is something that can be one of many very powerful rituals to break long-standing habits of emotional eating. So that's one thing I'd say. Number two is, I'd say, lean into your wisdom, and in a very particular way. The inherited all or nothing approach, that is really an expression of self-aggression, if you ask me. And why I say that is I've not yet met anyone who, after overindulgence, which is different than indulgence, overindulgence, or after extended deprivation, really feels proud of themselves and empowered. Like, it's just not the human experience, right? And so I would call either of those self-aggression. So the getting curious comes in looking at, is this or was this, if you're looking in the rearview mirror, which are both helpful, is this an act of self-aggression or is this an act of self-love? So getting curious about that and trusting your wisdom in what arises. And number three is really, honoring your journey with grace and compassion. You're going to win and you're going to fail. This is the name of playing any game. And we can relate to our wins and our failures in a productive way. So, when you're proud of yourself, and by win, I actually mean less like the number on the scale and more about like you being proud of yourself. Although, it's definitely useful if you step on the scale and you're happy with what you see, reflect on what had that occur. Like, what choices did I make? Because I made certain choices that led to this outcome. So what worked there? What really worked? And how do I duplicate that? And then on the failure front, whether it's stepping on the scale and not liking what you see, or simply waking up the next morning and saying, I had 6 glasses of wine last night and I said I was going to have 2, right? Like, you could call that failure to execute your plan, right? Fine. What can you learn from that? Well, I started drinking at 4. I know for me, you might find maybe a new strategy you bring in is I'm not going to have my first drink until I take my first bite of dinner, for example, right? But just getting curious about like, okay, what could be a new solution to this problem, and helping yourself make better choices rather than the perfect or bust game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that game also sets us up for even more failure.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And it's funny. I mean, there's a lot of people, it's like, I'm an all or nothing person. And they sit in my office. I'm like, well, how's that working for you? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. We're going to extract that all or nothingness out of you, right?
Yeah.
No, it's typically not working for people, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, there's always a better way, but I think it all goes back to that awareness component and the habit and just being mindful. And even with, what are you eating? It's like, oh, well, I didn't really realize I was eating so many carbohydrates, or I had no idea I wasn't eating hardly any protein, or maybe I had no idea I wasn't hardly eating enough. Like I was barely eating all day. Yeah. So, cause we just we're in like autopilot mode half the time, especially busy moms. So super important to just
definitely
be aware. So
and I think there's something,
go ahead.
Like in our American culture, right? My husband and I had the pleasure of living in Switzerland for about 3 years. And, people would say, oh my gosh, is the food so different? And like, yeah, the food is different, right? It's just less processed as a whole for sure. And we could go on about that. But the thing that I found maybe most lovely was how people relate to food. And, like they just don't relate to food like it's an inconvenience, right? They actually sit down and spend the time that's needed to eat a lunch, right?
Yeah.
It's not like, in America that we have the makers of Soylent from, whatever it was, like a decade ago, when the computer programmers came up with, this inconvenience of needing to step away from their screen to fuel their bodies. Let's just sit at the screen and drink this disgusting Soylent drink, right? Like that is so American versus, you are not, it is illegal to eat and drive in Switzerland. No joke. They do not have drive-throughs because it is illegal to eat and drive, right? And that to me is just such a great example of like, no, you have a body that requires fuel. And so you take time to give it fuel. Okay.
Yeah. They probably actually chew their food too.
Yep, they do.
One thing we also don't do. No wonder we have so much gut stuff going on.
Totally. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Jessie, we could probably talk forever, but we'll wrap it up. I'll ask one last question I ask all my podcast guests. What would be your best or favorite health tip that you could share with the audience?
Okay. Well, I'm just going to lean into what we have been talking about today. And really, I do believe this is true, is my best and favorite health tip is for you, the listener, you listening to this right now, is to play your best game right now. And so what that looks like is each time you're contemplating a choice, really asking yourself, what's the best game I could play right now? So as Dr. Erin and I were saying, this all or nothing approach that we've inherited just doesn't work for any of us as far as we can tell, right? So playing your best game really is going to get you farther along your journey than the all or nothing game, right? So your best game today for you really may be 3 glasses of wine over 5, or it may be no wine, or it may be 3 cookies instead of 5. So, it's really encouraging you to be honest with yourself about where you are in your journey. I think about it like crossing the monkey bars. We want you to grab that next monkey bar, whatever it is for you, and only you can say what that is. Maybe it's around, I'm going to go from 6 hours sleep to 6.5 and be in that journey of bumping it up over time. Or maybe it's, I'm going to work out for 10 minutes instead of 45 because 45 just sounds just totally daunting. But that better game, you can bring it to your health journey in so many different ways. And so I really encourage you to move throughout your day and your life with what is my best game right now at the forefront.
I love that. That's a good one. Very, very good advice. Dr. Jessie has a complimentary 30-minute consultation to explore working together. She has an upcoming course on middle ground mastery, and you can find all of that information on her website at wellempowered.com. We will make sure to have that in the show notes below. So thank you, Dr. Jessie, for being here today. It was a great conversation. I can't wait for the listeners to listen to this. And that's a wrap, everyone. We'll see you again next week. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. And if you haven't done so, please be sure to give us a rating on your favorite podcast platform. Join us weekly as we inspire you to be your best version. For more, follow me on Instagram at dr.erinellis. Until next week, you got this.